Scott Wallace, the current board chair of the Alumni Association Board of Directors. And I have the honor today of introducing our keynote speaker, Julie Manning. Julie is the Deputy Athletics Director and Sports Supervisor for men's basketball, women's volleyball, and women's golf. She has responsibility for each of these sports performance units, which means that she makes sure, and her group makes sure, that all the athletes are ready to play, basically. They cover medical services, athletic training, strength and conditioning, performance nutrition, all the things that our athletes need to perform at their best. She also oversees the Athletic Student Welfare and Leadership Unit, which develops and implements life skills program for athletes and also for other resources for the student athletes to access as part of their program. Prior to her time at the University of Minnesota, she spent time at the University of Wyoming and the University of Colorado, oversaw the department and coordination of Title IX. Finally, Julie began her career at Iowa State, so that's okay, she's not a Hawkeye, where she worked for nearly 20 years as the school's head women's golf coach. So with that, I'd like to introduce Julie Manning.
Well, thank you, Scott, and good afternoon to everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I certainly want to thank you for joining the University of Minnesota Alumni Association Mini College Day. I'm very honored and very grateful to have this opportunity to spend time with you today, talking about two things that are very important to me. One is Gopher Women student athletes and the women's sport programs. The second is Title IX. And as I often prefer to refer to it, it's really about access and opportunity. So I'm looking forward to spending time with you this afternoon talking about these topics. Before I start, though, I think it's very important that I want to be clear that I'm not a Title IX attorney. I'm not an attorney at all. But in 1972, when Title IX was enacted, I was a 12-year-old little girl growing up in a very small town right outside of Des Moines, Iowa. And now I am the Deputy Athletic Director, Senior Women's Administrator at one of the largest and most prestigious institutions in the country, with a remarkable athletics department and a historically, traditionally successful women's program. If it were not for Title IX, I would not be in this seat, and have this opportunity. I have greatly benefited from Title IX, as many women who sit in my chair across the country in various athletics departments do as well. So no question, I have directly benefited, and I'm going to share a little bit about my journey today and kind of weave that in with the athletics, women's sport athletic history, and a little bit about some special things that we have going on our campus today. So here we go. We have three historic occasions that are taking place on our campus this academic year. One is the celebration of 50 years of Gopher Women in varsity athletics, and that started in 1971. The second thing is we are the co-host, the University of Minnesota Athletics Department is a co-host of the NCAA Division I Women's Basketball Final Four Championship, which will be hosted at the Target Center on April 1st and 3rd of this year. We are co-hosting this with our friends, Minnesota Sports and Events, and very much looking forward to that opportunity. The third event, of course, is the actual anniversary of Title IX. It is specifically on June 23rd of 2022, and we're very much looking forward and continuing to plan with some campus activities. So three historic events are taking place all in the same year. To kick this off with regard to our celebration of 50 years of Gopher Women and varsity athletics, I want to share with you an introductory video clip that we have. We launched our campaign for the celebration earlier this summer, and this is the video that went with it.
Minnesota is the best in the Big Ten in 2017.
Congratulations to Minnesota, and they are your Big Ten champions.
seconds, 1 second, and for the 4th time in 5 years, the Golden Gophers are your national champions.
Making one more dive to defend her 1-meter title.
Just amazing. She defends her title in fabulous fashion.
Minnesota heading to the Final Four for the first time.
The road is not cut short this year. Minnesota is going to the national semifinals.
Well, how fortunate am I on a daily basis to work with those young women and those coaches and that support staff that surround them. So just a little bit of a taste of all that's happening with Gopher Women's Athletics. I'd be remiss if I didn't start us, though, and back up and do a little bit in the very early days when we could see that women were participating in some level of sport on our campus. And I'm going to take you back to 1903. Because that's at the point where we can see that we had our first women's basketball team compete extramurally. We can see that they won 10 games that year. And probably the most important significance, and the reason I bring this forward, is that they were awarded letters by the Board of Athletic Control. Now, we can see activity on our campus in the late 1800s. We can see that women were participating, recreating, and being involved in sport. But this is the first time that the recognition had been granted to the women's teams back in 1903. I'm going to move us forward to 1910. It's significant because freshman students are formally invited to join the Women's Athletic Association, the WAA, for both athletic and social purposes. For the first time, there is a national president, Elsa Yulin, who's not on our campus, but she is a leader across the country. She has some wonderful quotes, and I want to share those with you this afternoon. This is her talking to us in 1910. I think it's pretty remarkable what she's saying. The first reason is health. The only freedom and relaxation that you can get will come from real physical exertion that will leave your bodies pleasantly weary, but your minds suddenly fresh. The second great reason is the companionship, the generous, democratic, good fellowship that your part in athletics will make easy, spontaneous, and frank. She goes on to say, a life without physical vigor and without friends is almost bound to be futile and sad. Why not let athletics help to bring you these great things that we all need? And as it has already done in the past, so in the future, engagement in college athletics will make you stronger, saner, happier women. Quite a visionary. If you look at Elsa, who was born in 1888, she led a wonderful life. And you can see in these very early years, in the mid part of the century, the WAA was active on campus and had various offerings with badminton and basketball, golf and swimming and the such. I'm going to move us quickly through to the 1950s, significant because men began to return home from World War II, and with that became the return of women to the household. Prior to that, women had engaged in athletics in order to continue the entertainment sports had provided for so long. Yet with men coming home, women were no longer expected to play in sports. Women were expected to emulate the stereotypical housewife. Play dates were a common occurrence in the 1950s and really even into the 1960s. And play dates were scheduled days of athletics where women from all different colleges had the opportunity to not compete against one another, but rather play with one another. So we can see activity with our women at the University of Minnesota who would wake up one morning, they would fix their sack lunch, they would get in their cars, and they might drive to Grinnell College down in Grinnell, Iowa, and they would spend the day just playing sport with other women. They might start with badminton, they might go into a softball game, they might get involved in some sort of level of gymnastics, basketball. They would enjoy lunch, play that afternoon. They might have a round of golf, and then they would load back up in their car and come back up to the University of Minnesota. People that you talk to in this era loved being involved with play dates because of camaraderie, and as Elsa mentioned, the companionship, the opportunity to compete, to play against each other rather, not compete, was pretty extraordinary, and they knew that very early on. So in the late 1960s, many women's teams began to expand competition schedules outside of intramurals, facing other in-state university and colleges although the teams were not officially recognized at varsity clubs at this level or at this point yet either. So again, University of Minnesota women would get together, and they might go across town and compete against McAllister or Hamlin, or they might get in the car and compete against women who were at Winona. So pretty cool that what they were doing. So then things start to change as we click into the 1970s. And as I mentioned in the introductory slide, in 1971, the University of Minnesota officially recognized women's athletics through the physical education department, and they were given a budget of $5,000 from the Board of Regents Reserve Fund. Now remember, 1971 is in advance of 1972 when Title IX was enacted. No surprise to all of us that Minnesota was ahead of their time, was ahead of the curve, and certainly related to girls and women in sport. Swimming and diving was established as the first official women's varsity intercollegiate sport. Gene Freeman, the great legendary Gene Freeman, was the first coach and named in 1973. We continue on, and at the University of Minnesota officially formed the Women's Intercollegiate Athletics Department. So that would be separate from the men's department in the summer of 1975. Then the next summer, in June 23rd of 1972, Title IX is enacted. And as you know, Title IX prohibits federally funded educational institutions from discriminating against students or employees based on sex. I do have a video for you that I'd like to show you.
No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Go Gophers!
So I have to tell you that those two young ladies are daughters of our head women's soccer coach, Erin Chastain. That is Harper and Brooklyn Chastain. There are two young girls that obviously just came to the University of Minnesota as Erin was hired as our head women's soccer coach earlier this summer. They are also the nieces of Brandy Chastain, who is a World Cup soccer performer, and she was part of the 1999 World Cup. So we really enjoy that opportunity to have them with us, and certainly Erin, she's gotten us off to a remarkable start with taking over our soccer program. As a result of Title IX, any school that receives any federal money from elementary to the university level, in short, nearly all schools, must provide fair and equal treatment of the sexes in all areas, including athletics. Before Title IX, there were really few opportunities for female athletes. The NCAA was created in the early 1900s, but it was really formulated to govern the rules and enforce for football. Now we know the NCAA is naturally the governing body of all college athletics. But at that time, no athletic scholarships were offered, and there were no championships for women's teams. Facilities, supplies, and funding were lacking, and as a result, in 1972, there was just about 30,000 women participating in women's sports, as opposed to 170,000 men. Now, just to give you a slight frame of reference, currently there are about 3.4 million women in the United States, girls and women, who are participating at the elementary level, junior high, high school, and college. So there's no question the impact has had on participation for girls and women. Title IX was designated to correct these imbalances, although it did not require that women's athletics receive the same amount of money as men's athletics. It was designed to enforce equal access and quality. And that's why I like to refer to access and opportunity and quality. There's a list here. There are 13 items that, as a Title IX coordinator for our athletics department and others, are responsible for constantly tracking and monitoring that they are equitable. And it's constant monitoring. I think the University of Minnesota Athletics Department does a remarkable job. But we look at locker rooms, we look at the training, we look at the practice times, we look at how they are traveling, the per diem, the hotels, the equipment that they're provided, the tutoring that they receive, the recruitment that our coaches are able to take part in. We certainly need to keep track of our participation opportunities as compared to the general undergraduate population on campus, and certainly keep track of our scholarships. So this is commonly referred to as the laundry list. There are 13 items on the laundry list, and we're responsible to continue to monitor and track this. I'm going to move us forward a little bit more. In 1976, basketball players Kathy Eiland, Yvonne Miller, McDonald, and Trusella Taylor became the first African-American women to earn scholarships at Minnesota. They all came in on the same class, and they all played in the sport of basketball. Kathy Island, now Madison, has remained close. She stayed in the Twin Cities. She's a vice president of Human Resources and Diversity and Inclusion at Delta Dental, and I'm going to have you spend a little time with her in a video.
My name is Kathy Island Madison. I am a prodigy of the Twin Cities. I attended college here. I played in 1976 for 3 years on the women's basketball team and also attended the Carleton School of Management. I think females have benefited from just the opportunities to be able to play not only sports, but also being promoted in the business sector as well. Once women were allowed to play at the collegiate level, the focus really changed on how can I perfect my craft. You know, I was the center in high school, and I had to learn to turn around and learn to shoot differently and face the basket in a different way. So the focus for me has really been to be able to focus on my craft versus always being distracted by having to fight to be at the table. The movement to me means that females are given the same opportunities as their male counterparts in terms of playing sports, having opportunities in business at the table. And so I think it's exciting to see just the transition of women and the opportunities. There wasn't a WNBA when I played. We weren't given the same opportunities that the women are now, and I hope to see that catapult and continue.
Well, I think Kathy said that so well, and that message resonates of access and opportunity. And there's no question that Kathy definitely attributes her time as a student athlete, her ability to gain these transferable skills has led her to the position that she is in now, a C-suite woman and representing Delta Dental very well, of course. So let's go back and talk a little bit about who were the leaders of the women's athletics department in 1975. Remember, we talked about the decision was made to have separate departments, and that began in 1975. Typically, these women, there ended up being 4 athletic directors during this period of time. They came out of the physical education department for the most part. They were often teachers and they were coaching. And the first one was Belmar Gunderson, and she was hired as a first athletic director. She had a relatively short stint. She's alive and well. I saw her just a couple of years ago. She was actually back for an alumni reunion where she was celebrating her 50th year as a student athlete. Dr. Vivian Barfield is hired as a women's athletic director in 1976, and she held this position for 5 years. During Dr. Barfield's tenure, in 1977, the Minnesota legislature approved $1.2 million to the women's athletic department for the period of 1977 to 1979. We start to come into the early 80s, and Marilee Dean Baker was hired as the third women's athletic director. That same year, the NCAA became the primary governing body for women's athletics, and the AIAW, the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women's Sports, dissolved after a 10-year run, and the NCAA took over governing all of this, and it has remained since. So I come into play here a little bit. In the late 1970s and the early 80s, I was at Iowa State University, as Scott mentioned. I was a golfer down there, and I can vividly remember this happening, quite vividly, like it was yesterday. So all of our coaches at that time and across the country under the AIAW umbrella were women. There were women coaches coaching women. Most of them were, again, in the physical education department. That was 75% of their appointment. And the other 25% of the appointment, they were released and free and they could coach. I also remember at that time, our coaches and athletic director got all of the women student athletes together and talked to us about AIAW and what they feared might happen if we moved to Big Ten, if they moved to the NCAA umbrella. And what they feared and what they talked about at that time is that because all of the coaches were women, they were worried that if we moved under the NCAA umbrella, that there might soon be a lot of men who were interested in coaching women's teams. They asked us to write letters to the senators that we had and to ask them to forbid the NCAA from taking over. Well, they had tremendous insight because, as you know, again, in the late 1970s and under the AIAW umbrella, 95% of the coaches of coaching women's sports were women. Today, 43% of those who are coaching women's sport programs are women. So they did have quite a little foresight. The Big Ten Conference began in 1982 to formally sponsor women's conference play in championships. In 1988, Chris Voles is hired as the fourth athletic director, and she held that position until the decision was made to merge the two athletics departments in 2002. Chris Voles had an enormous impact on what we are experiencing yet today. The facilities that she was behind, the coaches that she hired, the success that she had in the late 1980s and then into the early 1900s, or 2019, was pretty significant, and it's still here today. You're going to see throughout the rest of this presentation a lot of Chris Volz's fingerprint on a lot of the success that we've had. A couple of names, I just want to just kind of make you aware that Minnesota was really starting to put our student athletes and coaches on the map. So in 1981, Gretchen Larson was the first softball All-American, two-time All-American. Chris Curry became the first women's swimming and diving national champion in the 3-meter. Unfortunately, in 1981, field hockey was one of the sports that was discontinued as a varsity sport. In 1989, the women's golf team really starts to come onto the national scene. They win the Big Ten title, and they finish 12th at the NCAA championship. Katie Hughes was an incredible golfer. I remember her, actually, when I was coaching at Iowa State, competing against her, and she was tough as nails. But she was the first-time All-American and Big Ten player. The volleyball program started to emerge and really started to get into postseason play. In 1990, the Aquatic Center was built and opened. In 1993, the women's soccer program became a varsity sport. 1994, Carol Ann Shudlick wins the Wade Trophy as the top female basketball player in the country. That is equivalent to the Heisman Trophy. 1996, Mike Hebert, in his 15-year tenure, comes on the scene. And of his 15 years, 14 of those years, our volleyball program was in the NCAA tournament. He had tremendous success and really started a great deal of what we again today experience, going to the Final Four, regionals and Elite Eight and what have you. In 1997, the women's hockey program is started. That's almost hard to believe. 3 years later, instant success. They win the American Women's College Hockey Association Championship. Not so hard to believe that part of it, right? In 1999, the ELR, Elizabeth Lyle Robbie Soccer Stadium, opened its doors. Now again, Chris Voles is still in the seat at this time, so a lot of that activity is generated, and Chris is the leader. The programs do merge in 2002. The decision is made. The University Women's Athletic Department become one on June 30th of 2002, and they hire Joel Maturi to be the athletic director to merge the program. As history shows, they could have not made a better decision. Joel did a remarkable job. His skill set, his ability to be a consensus builder, to collaborate, and to ensure that the women's program was still at a very high standard, he did a remarkable job. He and his wife, Lois, are constant spectators and supporters of our athletic program today. In 2004, we really start to excel. The women's basketball program for the first time goes to the NCAA Final Four basketball tournament. Of course, one of the players is legendary Lindsay Whalen. Our head women's basketball coach is on that team. In 2005, the hockey team wins its second straight national championship. Chrissy Wendell is named the Patty Casimir Award winner. So just a lot of incredible things happening. From 2005 to present, if I took the time to talk about all of the success and excitement and incredible things that we've had happen, I would dominate mini college. So what I decided to do instead is just to spend one slide where we talk about a lot of these various women who have done remarkable things, and some of them are still with us today. So let's start with the sport of volleyball. Stephanie Samity decided to play with us for 5 years. She just graduated in December. She is a two-time Big Ten Player of the Year. She was a runner-up Player of the Year nationally. Our women's volleyball program has been remarkable under Hugh McCutcheon's leadership. I believe 5 out of the last 7 years we've had the Big Ten Player of the Year, which is pretty remarkable. The Haas twins, Bethany and Megan, are incredible distance runners. They're from Alexandria, Minnesota. They're still competing for us this year. Rachel Banham, Her name is all over the record books, continues to be a wonderful player for the Lynx and an opportunity for us to continue to watch her. Natalie Darwitz, one of the greatest women's hockey players of all time. Guess what? We hired her this summer to come back and to coach our women's hockey program. So she's now with us, and she's passing on to this next generation of our women's hockey student athletes. Simone Colander, her parents both were student athletes at the University of Minnesota. There was no other place that she was going to go and play soccer. She had a remarkable career. She played professionally for a short period of time, and she came back to the Twin Cities and is working in the Twin Cities. Sarah G., we all know her as Sarah G., legendary softball pitcher that we had in our program. She pitched most recently in the Olympics for Canada. The United States did go against her. We often see her come back for alumni events. She's an incredible personality and was a dominant pitcher. Lexi Ramler, incredible gymnast, still with us today competing. Geraldine Wong, a golfer doing remarkable things on the golf course. Sarah Bacon, one of the best divers in the world, misses the Olympics by just a smidgen, decides to come back and spend another year with us. And she's actually diving this weekend. So stay tuned for more great news about Sarah Bacon, because she's a phenomenal athlete. So how are we celebrating these first 50 years of Gopher Women in varsity athletics on our campus? Well, first of all, we identified 4 honorary co-chairs. You've met a couple of them. Terry Ganley is a long-time, 44-year woman that is associated with our swimming program. She herself was a remarkable swimmer, a very decorated swimmer, and then she stayed with us with Gene Freeman and coached, just retired this last summer. You met Kathy Island Madison, who was on our basketball team. Dr. Liza Arndt, you'll have an opportunity to meet here in a future video that I have for you. Dr. Arndt was a pioneer. She's an orthopedic surgeon. To us, she was the chief medical officer for our athletics department, not for the women's athletics department, for our entire athletics department. And she did a remarkable job. And she's still a member of our faculty and continues to be an orthopedic surgeon. Leah B. Olson is a very familiar name. She was a basketball player, familiar name in the Twin Cities. She's an incredible broadcast communications person, sideline reporter, works with the Timberwolves and certainly the Lynx. And anytime we can get her, we try to get her with Gopher Athletics. As you can imagine, we have a dedicated landing page on our www.gophersports.com. I think you're seeing the logo that we are using in the videos. We have sponsors who are very interested in this work, and we're documenting these first 50 years. And that's how we are looking at it. These are just the first 50 years. We have a long way to go, and we can't wait to see what happens in the next 50 years. The Alumni Magazine has been very gracious in working with us. They are highlighting Title IX and some of these incredible stories of our women on campus, both student athletes and coaches and support staff. And in their March edition, you're going to see some really nice features. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. We're certainly partnering with the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport. We're so fortunate to have this world-renowned entity right there in our backyard. And so we will be partnering with them as well. I mentioned Chris Voles and her impact, and I don't believe that there is another athletics department in the country, really, that has athletic facilities named after women. And we don't have just one, we don't just have 2, but we have 5 athletics facilities that are named after women. And so we have our Jane Sage Coles softball stadium. Again, there's Chris Voles on the right side of that picture. She was very much behind this, visited with the Coles family about getting this started. Elizabeth Lyle Robbie Soccer Stadium, again, there's Chris Voles with Deborah Olson, who named this facility in the name of her mother. There are Robert and Kathleen Ritter, the only women's dedicated hockey facility in the country until Wisconsin built, and there's only 2 that are dedicated. The Jean Kane Freeman Aquatic Center, the pool was built in 1990. We come back in 2014 and we name it in Jean's name. The main competition pool is named after Dorothy Shepard. And then just recently, in 2018, the boathouse was named after Irene Claudia Kroll. Irene Claudia Kroll is the grandmother of 2 rowers, and their parents were so thrilled with the experience that their young women, their daughters, had gained with being a rower that they decided to name the boathouse in their mother's and in their grandmother's honor. So we've got 5 incredible facilities, and we would put them up against any facilities in the country. What also is very unique, I think, is that we have 5 women who were Gophers, who competed for us in their sport, and now they're back and they are coaching our women. Erin Chastain, our head soccer coach, I mentioned her a little bit earlier. Jenny Hansen was Jenny Elf, and she is our head women's gymnastics coach. Sarah Hopkins is our head men and women's cross-country coach. Piper Ritter is our head softball coach. And of course, Lindsay Whalen is our head women's basketball coach. Again, very unique. Do you think they care about Gopher athletics when they come back and they dedicate the rest of their lives, giving the women that they coach the same opportunity and more that they had? So on to the second historic occasion we have on our campus this year. As I mentioned, we are co-hosting with Minnesota Sports and Events the 2022 NCAA Women's Basketball Final Four Championship, April 1 and 3 at the Target Center. There are still tickets available. I understand we have a little less than 2,000 tickets that are for sale. The thing that is so neat about this, and we did not realize this was going to happen 3 or 4 years ago when we were in front of the NCAA Women's Basketball Committee making a pitch to get this to Minneapolis again, is the massive amount of education, awareness, recognition, and celebration that has been taking place in our communities since the bid was awarded. So many of our corporate partners, it takes tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to put these NCAA championship events on. And women's basketball is no different than men's basketball that we hosted a few years ago. But what these corporations, these Fortune 500 companies are grabbing onto is not so much the opportunities for these 4 teams to come and actually play in the Target Center on April 1st and 3rd. It's more about their ability to develop some activation and some awareness and their ability to celebrate their women in their respective corporations that are in their C-suites, that are their executives, and that there are their employees. So it's been a wonderful 8 or 9 months, and a lot of activity is taking place all around educating and celebrating women and access and opportunity. And as I've stated, the 3rd historic event that we'll have on our campus is the actual anniversary of Title IX, June 23rd. And still a lot of planning to happen, but most certainly a lot of activity will take place on our campus. It's a good time for me to remind all of us, the focus has gotten on athletics for Title IX, no doubt about that. But it was never just about athletics. Rather, it was always about access to education. Prior to Title IX, women students were denied equal opportunities under the law in academics, and women applicants were routinely denied equal access to med school, to law school, to pharmacy, to dental school, to vet school, and other graduate school. We've all heard the story about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, #1 in her Columbia class, her law class in 1959, and not having not one opportunity on the table to become a lawyer in New York City. Similarly, female faculty members were denied equal compensation and promotion. I mentioned that I was going to introduce Dr. Liza Arndt to you. I have a short video clip. Remember, she was our chief medical officer in a time when there were not women in this role, and she has obviously gone on and become and is a world-renowned orthopedic surgeon.
I'm Liza Arndt. My official title is Elizabeth, but I go by the nickname of Liza. I'm an orthopedic surgeon who has spent my entire clinical career at the University of Minnesota. I did my undergraduate work and residency at the University of Rochester in upstate New York. About halfway through my career, Title IX was passed to be enacted approximately 3 years later, and therefore our university began to put in place some things that would support Title IX. I think that sports medicine was also a very changing field at the time, and I knew I had a personal witness where they did not treat things very well, such as they still put ankle sprains in hot water. And so I felt that we needed to elevate the care of everyone on campus, but it would begin with our female athletes to gain access to the training room. So I became a female athletic trainer in my 3rd and 4th year at the university, at the same time that I was playing basketball and volleyball, which were two teams that were initiated based on Title IX. That's really what changed my career. So I entered into this really fascinating field of musculoskeletal care and care of the injuries of men and women. And by the end of my senior year, we did have co-ed training rooms, which were actually welcomed by all. We had an integrated training room where men and women helped to tape the ankles of the basketball players, men and women, and we began to see that integration. So that led me to orthopedics, that led me to sports medicine, and I stayed in upstate New York for my residency, and then I came here for my fellowship and stayed on as a faculty member at the University of Minnesota.
Well, Dr. Arndt is a special woman. You do see her from time to time. She still is behind our volleyball bench often and our women's basketball bench often. We certainly let her choose which event she'd like to work, given the history that she has. I would bet that there are people in the audience that you have worked with Dr. Arndt as an orthopedic surgeon, so she's pretty remarkable. We're lucky to have her. So the University of Minnesota Gopher Women in Athletics. I have to tell you, I've been at the University of Minnesota for 5 years. When I was at Iowa State University, no doubt, I was keenly aware of what was happening at the University of Minnesota because it was special. It is historic, what goes on here. It is elite, and it is premier. And I take it to heart that this is something that we have to sustain. It is a remarkable, the young women that are coming through our program and what they do academically, what they do socially, and how they represent us as Gophers on the court and field of play is remarkable. We have an obligation to sustain this. We're looking forward to a bright, bright future, and we need all of your help as fans and supporters and contributors to keep this thing going. And again, a remarkable, historic athletics department, women's athletics has just been remarkable, and I'm very honored to be a part of it.